So this is a summary for the second Dune Prequel book, The Machine Crusade. If you liked the Butlerian Jihad, which I did, you'll probably like this one too, but maybe you'll like it a little less. There are a lot of pages dedicated to the thinking machines themselves and how they want to escape serving Omnius. The thing is, the thinking machines on their own without the humans just aren't that interesting. I also could have done without the pages and pages of Erasmus's inner dialogue and philosophizing. There is a bit of a slump around page 400 where I was ready for it to kind of speed up or be over, but it recovers quickly and the story is still pretty good. We encounter Caladan for the first time. It's really cool reading about Vorian Atreides' visits there. We have the Ginaz Mercenaries, Duncan Idaho's possible ancestors. So all in all, really interesting, even though we're still pretty far removed from any characters that we might know or recognize. Anyway, onto the video. The prologue of Crusade starts with an account from the first official historian of the Jihad, named Nam the Elder. We're 24 years into the fighting, into the Jihad inspired by the death of Serena Butler's baby. Remember, her baby was murdered by a thinking machine called Erasmus when he dropped the baby from the balcony, while Serena was held captive by him. Billions upon billions have died in the Jihad, and Iblis Ginjo is now the head of the Jihad Council, and Nam claims that he has transformed Serena's tragedy into a weapon, and she doesn't seem to realize it. Gingo also established the Jihad police called the Jipol, and their task was to weed out supposed traitors and spies on the side of the thinking machines. It's implied that Gingo might be arresting his political enemies as well. By the way, like Vorian Atreides, Gingo was also previously a trusty human to the thinking machines. At this time, Vorian Atreides is studying the enemy forces. Even though Omnius's ships outnumbered the human ones were protected from any damage from the shields created by Holtzman and Norma. The Jihad forces are trying to hold off the thinking machines advancing on a planet called Anbus. But Xavier Harkonnen is having a difficult time negotiating with the people there who want to be left alone. They want to isolate themselves and not fight the thinking machines. The population of Anbus was the Buddhist-Islamic sects, and this became the center of the Zen-Shiite civilization. They were seen as religious fanatics and they were largely left alone. However, the thinking machines wanted this planet because in the capital of Daritz, there was a powerful dam and the city's power grid and communication lines made it very sophisticated. The thinking machines could turn it into a powerful base from which they could launch attacks against the League worlds. On Selusa Sendicus, an anti-jihad movement had begun to grow as well, as people were tired of the decades of endless war. Back to Anbus, in a meeting with Xavier, the Zen-Shiite elders are still not keen on helping fight against the thinking machines, and they accuse him of being a hypocrite because back when the Tluluxa flesh merchants came and stole men and fertile women from the planet, where were the League humans to help them then? Xavier tells them that whether they help or not, he won't let the machines take over this world because it will make the other League worlds vulnerable. Iblis Ginjo is in the tranquil city of introspection, and he hopes to get some help there, but the female Cogitor, named Quina, is reluctant to offer any advice. We'll find out in a bit why. He makes his way to Parliament then and fancies himself quite an important figure there, purposely making a late grand appearance. Beaming with confidence, Iblis Ginjo made his grand entrance. As the proxy for Serena Butler herself, he was the spokesman for humanity and its holy jihad against the thinking machines. 10 violent years after the atomic destruction of Earth, old Mannion Butler had retired as League Viceroy, asking his daughter Serena to be appointed to take his place. She had been voted in by acclamation, but insisted that she be called only the interim Viceroy until the conclusion of the war. Delighted, Iblis had insinuated himself as her closest advisor, writing speeches for her, building the fervor for the crusade against the thinking machines. So Iblis arrives at Parliament to announce some new information, some writings from a prophet believed to be from Earth, and he needs Quina's help translating the rune symbols. The rune is partially destroyed, so the complete message can't be read. But what can be read says that humans will have to struggle for a millennium before they find their way to paradise. Iblis uses this to call for an expansion of jihad forces, additional warships, and dedicated soldiers, renewed offensives against Omnius. Quite convenient for Iblis, and he uses this to his advantage. This passage in particular, he interprets it to justify his continuation of, or even the escalation of the jihad efforts. Serena's baby, Marion's body, is also kept in a shrine in the city of introspection, and this is where Serena Butler and a small number of jihad devotees go to meditate. Serena now lives in relative isolation in the city of introspection, having been brought there after an assassination attempt on her. Also carefully selected for her by Iblis was a group of 3 women who acted like her ladies-in-waiting, her Sephirim priestesses of the Jihad. They were robed with hoods of gold-scale mesh, and they had jihad symbols painted above their eyebrows. At this time, Serena's mother Olivia walks in to tell her of Iblis, who they call the Grand Patriarch, and his request in the Hall of Parliament, and her mother is concerned that this will lead to more bloodshed. Serena gives a seemingly rehearsed response. She answered with the so familiar words, "Sacrifices are necessary to achieve our ultimate victory, mother. My jihad has blazed for 2 decades, but not brightly enough. We cannot accept an endless impasse. We must redouble our efforts." Serena isn't concerned when her mother tells her that Iblis had said almost exact same thing, because her heart is hardened now, and nothing should stand in the way of their freedom from the thinking machines, especially since her baby's life was sacrificed in this fight. Sacrifices are all part of the cause. Her mother invites her to accompany her back to Selusa Syndicus to visit Octa, her sister, and her 2 daughters, Serena's nieces. Remember when Serena was in captivity and thought dead? And it was suspected that she died. Xavier Harkonnen, her fiancé and the father of her late child, ended up marrying Serena's sister Octa. Serena says that she's no longer jealous of her sister, and she doesn't resent Xavier for it either. Everything needed to happen as it did to galvanize the jihad movement. Just then, another assassination attempt is made on Serena, and the person responsible is one of her own guards, who's revealed to be a traitor. But her Sephirim named Nerium quickly neutralizes the threat. After this, Nerium is appointed Chief Seraph. At this time, from the original 20 Titans, only 4 remained, and they're convening on the synchronized world of Corrin. Agammemnon also has another son named Beowulf, a human who turned into a Cymic to help in their fight, but he knows that he trained Vorian really well, so this won't be an easy fight. The story of Selim also continues. In Jihad Book 1, he was accused of stealing water, and for that he was made to go out into the desert with the understanding that he wouldn't survive because nobody survived the worms out there. Of course he did survive. Not only that, he learned how to ride the sandworms, and over time he tried to stop his old tribe from selling melange to off-worlders. Selim had a melange vision which showed him that the sale of melange to the off-worlders would eventually lead to the destruction of the peaceful desert planet. He worked alone to destroy the encampments he found that collected spice. And that's how he became known as the legendary Worm Rider, and he began to gain a following. On the planet Poritrin, there are slaves, but these are enslaved to humans who are working on components for the starships to assemble new battleships, based on Holtzman's suggestion and with Lord Nico Blood's approval. So more than 1,000 men have been brought to Poritrin to work on this project in factories. Among these are members of the Zensuni tribe who were brought and imprisoned on Poritrin as slaves, and this started to become their home. And our 40-year-old Norma Canva was sequestered to a much smaller and cheaper lab, but she was glad to be left alone in relative isolation so that she could do her maths calculations, and she didn't need to have slaves do that for her anymore. She spent most of her days going in and out of a kind of fugue state, figuring out her numerics. She was also certain that she could learn how to fold space, that it would be possible to travel distances without physically moving. Aurelius Vanport, the former lover of Chief Sorceress Zufa Canva, Norma's mother, is an important businessman with a very successful merchant company, and he is on his way to see Norma on Poritrin by her invitation. Meanwhile, on Ivy Anvus, the Zenshiites are so unwilling to work with the League soldiers, even in the face of the incoming machines, that they poison the soldiers and sabotage their weapons. Xavier's younger brother Virgil is also a part of the fighting forces. Remember, Emil Tantor and his wife Lucille adopted Xavier, and they later had Virgil. The Leagues end up being victorious against the thinking machines on Ivy Anbus, in part because they allowed the dam to burst. But even after this, they would still be blamed by the Zenshiite elders, especially Xavier Harkonnen, because he destroyed much of their holy city in the process. There is a pretty big reveal then back in the city of introspection. After a talk with Cogitors Quina, she suspects that Iblis may be fulfilling his own ambitions with the jihad and acting rashly for not waiting to interpret the entirety of the prophecies that he used to make his decision. It's also revealed that Iblis has engaged in more sinister practices to keep Serena in her place, so to speak. At first, the young woman had willingly followed his instructions to achieve worthy, noble results. But when she had started to disagree with him, Iblis had fabricated possible threats to her safety so that he would be justified in assigning a group of his hand-picked Sephirim as her personal bodyguards. When Serena continued to be too independent, he had staged an assassination attempt, and he framed one of his sacrificial dupes who was conveniently killed during capture. Thereafter, for her protection, Serena stayed inside the walls of the City of Introspection, where he could keep a close eye on her. He had to make certain that Serena Butler never felt completely safe, so that she would always depend on him. Back on Ivy Anbus, things aren't going very well. The thinking machines strike back at the League ships, and they manage to take some captives, one of whom is Xavier's brother, Virgil Tantor. This is when Vorian and his father also have their first kind of reunion. In a final desperate ploy, not knowing who had actually been inside the seized escape pods, Vor broadcast, "Now, Cymex, are you cowards who flee from battle? This is Primera Vorian Atreides, and I scoff at you. My father, General Agammemnon, taught me that humans were inferior, that Cymex could always win a fight. If so, then why are you running?" Startling him, Agamemnon's deep voice came back, sounding like slowly boiling oil. "I also taught you, Vorian, that hurting an enemy is more satisfying than a straightforward victory. We shall see how much pain we can inflict upon our guests. I presume they are friends of yours? I'll enjoy playing with them all." Virgil served under Vorian, so Agamemnon is especially pleased to be able to get information out of him. The machines end up torturing him until he dies a painful death after a lot of suffering. Serena goes to the Cogitors tower in the City of Introspection because she needs some advice from Cogitor Quina. We learn that the disembodied female philosopher had lived a full life in human form and then had spent over 1,000 years simply contemplating everything that she had learned. Serena becomes defensive when Quina points out that Iblis often creates so-called truths and wisdom to justify his actions. She also says something that Serena's mother told her, that she sounds like Iblis. Obviously, Quina can't make decisions for Serena, but she asks her if doubling down on the jihad efforts is the right thing to do, if this is really what Serena believes. Serena doesn't answer the question, but she does say that she's merely human and she doesn't have the capacity or time for contemplation when she needs to act. When the fighters come home from Ivy Anbus, Serena gives a speech and later says to some of the injured survivors that she will see to it that they get all of their organs and the limbs that they need. Serena will have the Tluluxa harvest them. Iblis, of course, makes the move to make this actually happen, offering the Tluluxa a bonus for supplying these body parts. We're going to find out later just how they go about getting these body parts. It's pretty dark. Making up part of the jihad effort are the highly skilled mercenaries from the Islands of Ginaz. Zon Noret is training and his 19-year-old son Jul is watching. Their story goes that a century ago, a damaged thinking machine, a combat robot, was found and they managed to reinstall parts of it which provided hand-to-hand combat techniques and training for 4 generations of these mercenaries on Ginaz. They learned special techniques against the robots, and Zon and Jul were amongst those who received this training. Many robots had been destroyed in the jihad because of the specialized training by this repurposed thinking machine called Chirox. Jul had 14 siblings because the Noret bloodline was in some way superior, but he was the most skilled fighter of them all and the most talented in a generation. The Ginaz weren't part of the jihad's official rank. They preferred to maintain their independence, and they also preferred close-up combat rather than the heavy machinery and equipment that the jihad used. After an accident during training, Zon gets killed, but just before he dies, he tells his son Jul that he now has to become the best fighter that Ginaz has seen. If Ginaz does sound familiar to you, this is part of Duncan Idaho's lineage. Zufa Kenva is in the jungle on the planet Rossak, and she's reflecting on that terrible Cymac attack that happened 2 decades earlier. Since that time, she'd continued to train the Rossak women who demonstrated the greatest telepathic potential, candidates who could be taught how to build their psychic powers to critical levels and then release them in shockwaves, capable of vaporizing Cymacs, even Titans. Over the years, though, many of the sisters were killed, and so the newer candidates were becoming younger and younger. We then move to 1 year after the battle on Ivy and Bus. Aurelius Venport and his melange business partner Cogitors are going to meet Norma Kenva on Poritran. She wants to share her space-folding ideas with Venport. The issue is that Holtzman and Blood pretty much have her under permanent contract, which states that any work that she creates is the property of Poritran, and by extension theirs. Venport decides that he's going to fight this contract by reminding them both that Norma wasn't even of legal age when she came to work for them, and that she still does have a legal right to representation. After hours of talk, Venport finally agreed to share with Poritran a third of the profits from the Globe sales over the next 20 years. However, Venport said, leaning forward and hardening his voice, there is one stipulation that is absolutely non-negotiable. From this point forward, you will not challenge or dispute Norma Kenva's right to set up another laboratory of her own, and you will not hinder her from pursuing any further research as she chooses. Blood has this contract drawn up to allow Norma to keep the rights now of anything she creates. So remember, Holtzman doesn't think that Norma is working on anything particularly game-changing, and they have the profits from the Globe, so they're happy for now. Cogitors tells Venport about the sabotage happening on their spice collecting efforts on Arrakis, and Venport tells him that the very possible profitable consequence if Norma creates this space folding technology is that they could transport cargo like melange in a fraction of the time. On Poritran, one of the slaves, Ishmael, watches as he sees a Tluluxa slaver with one of the supervisors. Remember that Tluluxa have been tasked with getting human parts by Iblis. I am required to inventory your captive personnel. They are to be considered resources for the army of the Jihad. We Tluluxa desperately need a large number of healthy slaves from a wide range of body and tissue types. This is our highest priority. Holtzman refuses to let any of his slaves go to the flesh merchant, saying that he can't spare any because his project is too important. He tells the Tluluxa that there are some other disposable bodies though, on Arrakis, the ones who are causing a nuisance for the spice collectors. On Arrakis, a boy named Aziz has been tasked by his Naib Darta to find Selim and try and broker a peace deal with him. We must end this foolish feud and stand united for our common interests. Otherwise, the off-worlders will divide and conquer us all. Even an outlaw like Selim cannot want such a thing. You must find him, Aziz, and tell him what I have said. By the way, by this point, the Zen Sunni nomads have become quite accustomed to a more cushy life since trading spice. So Aziz isn't doing so well out in the desert. He's struggling to survive. He didn't have those same survival skills that the elders had. Selim and his group, on the other hand, are quite the opposite. They're able to survive without luxuries and much water. Aziz does eventually give his message to Selim and tells him that his grandfather wishes that Selim would rejoin the tribe and they could live in peace. Selim obviously laughs this off, but he does take Aziz on a worm ride back. And Aziz is also starting to question his grandfather after he finds out that the reason for Selim's excommunication was based on a lie. He's also amazed by Selim's command of the worms, and he doubts that such a man would lie. Just as the computer Evermind could occupy itself and transmit updates to endure one destruction after another, each Ginaz mercenary believed that after death his fighting spirit was transferred like a data file into the body vessel of his successor. It was more than reincarnation. It was a direct continuation of the battle, a handoff from one warrior to another. Before leaving for Selusa Syndicus, Jewel finds out that someone named Jav Bari has been reborn within him. From Selusa, he and the other mercenaries will be deployed to X with the Jihad army. We also find out that there might be more to Iblis than meets the eye. While watching one of Iblis's speeches, Zufa Kenva thinks again about how unaware he is of his powers. The extrapolated breeding chart on this male was fascinating, with roots that went back to her own jungle planet. Available evidence indicated that the Grand Patriarch had innate telepathic abilities, an exceedingly rare trait in a non-female. Though his ancestry was obviously unknown to him, Iblis Ginjo must be the distant descendant of Rossak natives taken captive by machines long ago and moved to other worlds. Zufa believes that he's the most dangerous man she's ever met, and she vows to keep an eye on him. Serena's mother reveals to her that without her knowing, Iblis has fed the planet X to the wolves basically by whipping the people there into a frenzy to support the Jihad, and allowing them to be slaughtered by the machines because Iblis knows that they stand no real chance of winning. Her mother points out that Serena has blood on her hands if she doesn't do something about this. Hundreds of thousands of fighters have been killed needlessly, almost as though Iblis enjoys heading up this war effort that has no clear strategy. When the Cogitor Quina says the same thing, Serena remains unmoved at first, insisting that these martyrs are the cost of doing war. Now the Cogitors' voice became gentler in Serena's mind. I know your heart is true, but I am weary from the deep ponderings of 2 millennia. From now on, I cast you free of my protection. Think your own thoughts and fly from the nest to your destiny. In this moment then, Quina ceases to exist. Serena decides then that it's time for her to lead her own jihad. Xavier and Vorian talk about the war effort, and Xavier feels similarly to Serena, that sacrifice and the mass casualty count is inevitable. Vor disagrees with the immense loss of life. He feels that the mission on X was a mistake and that Iblis just wants to take X for its industrial centers. We also reminded that Iblis fomented the initial uprising on Earth back in Book 1. So the League deploys an army to liberate X, and obviously with them are the mercenaries from Ginaz. Xavier notices that this lot are even more intense and skilled than the previous fighters. This time they're led by their champion, Jul Noret, who's described as being an enigmatic loner. Xavier approaches him one day to ask him to train his men, but Noret declines, saying that he doesn't need the burden of them getting hurt if what he's taught them isn't properly applied and they get killed out on the battlefield. But he does agree to let the men observe the mercenaries' training sessions. When Xavier says that he will arrange a bonus for his efforts, Noret declines that as well and says that all he wants is free reign to kill machines. So remember back in Jihad Book 1 when Vorian had decided to turn on his father and the thinking machines and join the humans? Well, he had deactivated the robot captain of an Omnius update ship back on Earth. Now he returns to Earth in search of this vessel. When he finds it, he plants a new gel sphere in the secret storage compartment to make it look like legitimate intel to the thinking machines. Surat, the previously deactivated robot, comes back to life. Touching pressure pads, Surat sets a direct course for the nearest synchronized world, where he would deliver the gel sphere that held the final thoughts of the Earth Omnius. Of course, he is unaware that the code has been altered, corrupted by Vor. After a visit to Porritrin, Iblis is about to depart, but he's alerted to an asteroid that is headed right for them. Abruptly, all power went out, even the backup systems. A chill wind seemed to accompany the darkness that engulfed the ship as they were swallowed by the gigantic asteroid. Erasmus, meanwhile, is tasked with observing a little slave boy named Gilibertus Albans. Observing him, Erasmus assessed what to do. The boy had been attired in the finest clothes, but did not seem to value them in the least. Repeatedly and patiently, the robot had tried to tutor him in manners and social responsibilities and other acceptable behavior patterns. Yet Gilibertus insisted on smashing valuable objects, messing his room, ripping up books, and ignoring his studies. I wonder if this is a Harkonnen ancestor. So it turns out that a rogue original Titan is responsible for the asteroid that hit the ship that Iblis was on. They're trapped inside of this asteroid now, and Iblis steps outside when commanded by his attackers. A human-sized figure stepped out of a shadowed pocket in one of the mirror-plated walls. It was a machine form, but unlike any Iblis had ever seen in his time as a trustee and slave master on Earth. A beautiful, yet frightening monstrosity on graceful segmented legs, a head studded with optic threads raised on a sinuous neck covered with pearlescent scales, while long angular plates protruded from the sides like prismatic butterfly wings. The sharp forelimbs were delicate and curved, resembling the appendages of a praying mantis. The machine reminded him of a robot dragon, fearsome but aesthetically pleasing. This is Hecate, a long-forgotten Cymek, and one of the original Titans, who had broken ranks with the rest of the Titans. Now Hecate is back and doesn't want to serve Omnius, like the rest of the Titans. Both Iblis and his men and Hecate decide to join forces then. It would, after all, be a big advantage to have one of the original Titans on their side. Iblis and his lieutenants will keep this new secret weapon a secret though. Noret and his mercenaries and some of the Jihad army finally free the Ixians on the ground. All that's left is to destroy the machine ships in orbit. Just then though, because Iblis asks Hecate, she sends an asteroid to X to help the Jihad fighters in orbit. Iblis finally returns home from Porritrin to find out that Serena had already revised many of the policies of the Jihad Council. He tries to hide his anger and disappointment, and Serena now even sits at the head of the table in the seat where he used to sit, and she addresses the council about the potential end of the jihad, how best to achieve that. Venport, who by the way had since realized that he was in love with Norma and proposed marriage to her, goes out to Arrakis to check on his investment and look into the sabotage. Accompanied by Dartha, Venport had visited spice harvesting camps today, including the site of a recent bandit raid. He was dismayed at the extensive vandalism to the melange harvesting equipment and the loss of so much product. One of the Naib's lieutenants described how he had only narrowly escaped with his life during a harrowing assault, an experience that left him telling fantastic stories about the outlaws as if they were superhuman. I have much invested in this operation, Naib Dartha, and I refuse to lose profits because of unruly vandals. Your expenses have grown higher in recent years and your melange deliveries no longer meet the quantities you promised. A man of honor fulfills his contracts. Things get quite tense because Venport wants to intervene, but Naib Dartha wants the Outworlders to remain out of their problems. They will solve them. Selim marries Marha, one of his followers, who kind of rises in the ranks as well. As for young Aziz, for many nights he had dreamed of joining the bandit group himself and becoming one of the romantic outlaws. One night, he decides to run off into the desert. Naib Dartha wakes up just in time to see Aziz eventually consumed by a worm, and he blames Selim for this, for falsely giving people ideas that they might survive out there, as some kind of heroes. Vorian Atreides eventually makes it onto Caladan because of his mission to establish an observation outpost there. Caladanian fishing villages were quaint and rustic. The people built their boats and painted the sails with family markings. Without weather satellites, they studied wind patterns and even tasted salty air to predict storms. They knew which seasons offered the best fishing, where to find the shells and edible seaweed that form the staples of their diet. There, Vorian tells the villagers of his adventures on different planets. He also meets a woman named Leronica Turgit, the daughter of a local fisherman. Vorian has had several lovers over the years, and he's even admitted that he might have some illegitimate children, but his life isn't one for a wife and family. Xavier, meanwhile, is with his wife Octa, who has just given birth to their third daughter named Wandra. Serena administered her sacred blessing to each of the newly designated secondary monks, but Iblis had made all the choices long before informing her. These monks will become the ivory tower Cogitors on Selusa Syndicus. So not only has Iblis ensured that these monks were from his choosing, therefore partly under his influence, he proposes marriage to Serena in order to save himself from his imminent irrelevance as she takes back some of her power. He's even willing to pay off his wife and dissolve his already existing marriage. Serena is immune to any charms that he might be working on her though, and she rejects him, which sends him into a rage. On the inside, of course, he doesn't outwardly express this. Zufa Kenva visits Iblis shortly after this. A male telepath was extremely rare, considered nearly impossible. But Zufa had seen the signs in this man, and she needed to bring his valuable bloodline back to her world. Given her own abilities and the Grand Patriarch's history, she did not believe it would be difficult. They sleep together then, so that Zufa may have her perfect daughter from Iblis' superior bloodline, so her daughter might have powers. And this kind of alliance with a sorceress is also very valuable to Iblis, so it is a quid pro quo. On Poritrin, Holtzman goes to visit Norma's research facility, her labs, and while she doesn't tell him what she's working on, he deduces that it's something very big, possibly her crazy idea of folding space. Because of the high security, he doesn't get as much access to information or to the rest of her buildings, so he reports to Blood, and together they think up ways to sabotage Norma and her project. At least make it so that any profits are funneled to them, because they don't want to miss out on that. Venport decides to spend some time on Arrakis to try and gain back some of the stability so that his melange business trade is no longer disrupted. To aid in this effort, he hires soldiers, guards, and mercenaries to maintain order. This is when Naib Dartha comes to him and tells him that Selim and his band of outlaws are the cause of the disruption, and of course responsible for his grandson's death. He would like some of Venport's resources to help fight him. Selim knows that Dartha and some of the off-worlders are coming for him because he sees it in a dream. He sends Marha, their unborn child, and the others deep into the desert, and he decides to stay and face his enemies. The vessel from Earth, the one that Vorian corrupted, finally reaches the synchronized world of Corrin. While Erasmus and Omnius are talking, there's a sudden blackout and Omnius disappears. Erasmus then discovered from talking with other robots that all Omnius systems on the planet were completely shut down in a pervasive paralysis. Unguided vehicles crashed, industrial equipment overloaded and began to burn. The entire software presence of Omnius had been erased. Everything was being ruined by the bug that was placed in the Omnius update from Earth by Vorian. Holtzman comes back and he eventually raids Norma's research lab. He confiscates her blueprints and research, even though he doesn't actually understand it. Norma is to be exiled. Tukadir manages not to be taken in, but he goes to rescue any leftover scrap metal that he can find. The Zensuni slaves on Poroshin, meanwhile, have been planning a rebellion for some time, and now it's time for action. They attack Kider and demand an escape on Norma's abandoned ship, and others take to the streets. Blood and Holtzman are both declared dead in the ensuing violence. The escapees end up in Arrakis after Kider is able to make Norma's old fold spaceship work. On Arrakis, some of the Offworlders and Niabdartha finally track Selim, even though the rest of the tribe was already gone. There ends up being a huge massacre when 4 worms arrive and engulf the Offworlders, all of their military machinery, Daib Natha, and also eventually Selim. Norma ends up being kidnapped and taken into captivity by a Simek, an original Titan named Xerxes, who's fascinated by Norma's brilliant mind. Norma's paralyzed and tortured, but at one point she reaches the highest point in her pain and agony that her Rossak powers are unlocked. She's able to deflect the pain that's inflicted on her. Her skin melts away then and converts into raw energy. She detonates something that evaporates all of the Simeks. Remember that she had never displayed any telepathic ability before. Now, she could also see across millions of galaxies and forever. And then she creates her physical form. Her unseen hands worked swiftly, molding every feature, reshaping her new body with the available cellular material into an icily beautiful, tall, and statuesque female form. More stunning than any other sorceress on Rossak, even surpassing Zufa Kenva. Her fiercely glowing eyes became a soft, seductive blue. The skin was ivory and creamy smooth over a perfect frame and sensual curves. This news gets to the now only 3 remaining original Titans who think that Xerxes was a fool for taking on Norma, the daughter of the famed Zufa Kenva. Realizing that his power is diminishing, Iblis asks Hecate if she can create chaos on synchronized worlds and create the opportunity to have the Jihad save the day, but in a way that Iblis will be able to claim the credit. After her transformation, Norma transmits a message to her mother, telling her to come to the austere planet of Kolhar. At first, Zufa thinks that this message could be from the fetus inside of her, but because it was transmitted in a way that's so powerful, this would still be impossible under normal circumstances. She considers Norma, but also that would be surprising because Norma never had any powers. Eventually, she reaches Kolhar and is greeted by a beautiful blonde woman. Norma finally reveals herself and mother and daughter reconcile. Norma tells Zufa that she knows how to make the space folding tech that would allow them to travel from one planet to another in mere moments. Norma needs help and she wants to join forces because she's always discounted the political side of the battle, and this resulted in near failure before, at the hands of Blood and Holtzman. She sends for Vanport then, who arrives overjoyed that Norma is still alive, and he agrees to stay with her and carry out their plan to win the Jihad and save humanity. By the way, Vanport fell in love with Norma even when she was a very plain and unattractive woman. Even now that she has this beautiful transformation, which by the way Norma did by combining all of her past ancestors' genes, Vanport says that it's still his Norma, so he loves her anyway. Serena goes on a tour of the Tluluxa organ farms, and there she mentions that she wants to maintain a library of cells of Xavier, Ginjo, and even Dr. Suk. Also, remember, Iblis had gone behind her back to the flesh merchants to get extra organs for the war effort. Although nothing is revealed to Serena, she has this feeling that something is off. The escaped Ishmael, his daughter Chamal, and the other Zensunis are still battling it out on Arrakis, trying to find Arrakis city as their supplies dwindle out in the desert. Many have since died of starvation, and it's not looking good for them. One evening, Jafar, from Celine's band of outlaws, arrives and tells them that they have agreed to take in the Zensuni freed slaves and teach them how to survive out in the desert if they work hard and earn their keep. Ishmael and the group accept, and they join Selim's group. The Jihad army arrives to a small colony on Chusuk to see that the thinking machines have completely decimated it. They haven't taken over, they just killed everyone and destroyed the colony. Back on Caladan, even though Leronica is pregnant with Vor's baby, she agrees to marry a man named Kalim Vaz, who had unsuccessfully courted her for years. She eventually gives birth to twins, Estes and Kagin. Even though she does still think of Vor, 2 years since his last visit to Caladan, Kalim turns out to be a good husband and a doting father, so Leronica makes the decision to focus on her marriage and make that work. And they do have a peaceful, happy life. Work is underway on Kolhar as they build great shipyards. Norma also tells Vanport that she's allowed herself to conceive their child. Remember, she has the powers of internal cellular and chemical manipulation. Zufa, back on Rossak, also gives birth to her baby girl named Tessia Kenva. 7 years later, Serena's father Mannion Butler dies at age 84, 36 years into the Jihad. Not long after, her mother Livia dies as well, and the Kolhar shipyard produces its first fleet of space-folding merchant vessels. The little slave boy taken in by Erasmus goes through the same torturous treatment that Vorian Atreides did, to give him more strength and make him virtually immortal, so his biological body now will keep its health for hundreds of years as long as he takes care of himself. Serena decides to pay the new Cogitor assistant, the one that Iblis had actually installed, a visit for help with the Jihad effort in order to get a faster victory, and she knows very little about them. They serve in a place called Hesra. At first, they refuse to offer any help because they need to maintain their neutrality, but Serena manages to plead her case, and they say that they will intervene the moment they deem right. The 3 remaining Titans, Beowulf, and several high-ranking Neo-Cymex are on Betelgeuse, their new Cymic empire. This is their base from which they launch attacks against Omnius update ships. Hecate is there too. Earlier, she had sent an asteroid to Betelgeuse to destroy the Evermind, but the League humans were too late to respond, so the planet fell to the Titans. She tells them that perhaps they and the humans could defeat their common enemy together, the Evermind. Serena quite rudely demands that Venport hand over some of his space-folding ships to the Jihad effort, even though he tells her that they're not completely safe yet. He himself doesn't even travel in these folding machines yet. Still though, this would be a game changer for the war, and of course all sacrifices are necessary for the war according to Serena. She says that she has some volunteers who would risk it. Venport has leveraged his entire company though, so he can't just give these away for free and risk bankruptcy, but Serena thinks that these are minor details, and it bothers Venport that they can't sign off on an actual deal. He is a businessman after all. When Leronica and Vorian's twins are 8 years old, they go on a fishing trip with their stepdad and grandfather. While they're away, Leronica does receive a gift from Vorian and a note that acknowledges that she's probably moved on with her life, but he hopes that she sometimes thinks of him. He tells her that soon enough, traveling will be much easier. Just then, her father comes back from the fishing trip alone. Kalem's boat is nowhere to be found. Out at sea, it was lost near a nest of Elkarons, these strange electrical creatures that lived in the oceans of Caladan. Kalem had thrown the boys into their grandfather's boat, saving their lives and giving his up in the process. The late Selim's band of desert dwellers is still sabotaging the melange trade, and Marha and Ishmael grow closer. He even has a spice dream that her son's life is in danger and he saves him. The Cogitors then try to broker a peace deal with the machines, and they seemingly agree with one condition. The simplest solution is an immediate cessation of all hostilities between you and the League nobles, Vidad said to Omnius. You keep your synchronized world, and the free humans keep their League worlds. In exchange, the mutual aggression ends. There will be no further deaths, no further violence between machine and man. For how long? In perpetuity. I accept your suggestion, Omnia said from the wall screen, but you must send a League representative to formally accept the terms. Do not return if the League refuses. The Cogitors then inform Iblis of this, and they're ready to call it. The war is over. Quite prematurely, really. Later, Serena is informed, and she does not accept the terms. She wants the thinking machines completely destroyed. This will be fine in the short term, she says, but she doesn't see this as a long-term solution. She also wants a definitive victory because she doesn't believe that the thinking machines will honor their end. Suddenly, Serena and Iblis are kind of on the same side as she goes to him, and they hatch a plan to keep the Jihad going. He tells her that the people need to be reminded of just what they're fighting for because they've grown tired and they've forgotten. She needs to reignite that spark. Serena makes a speech then announcing that she will go to Corrin to officially close the deal and end the war. Vorian goes back to Caladan and reunites with Leronica. He spends a few weeks there before being called back to Selusa on Jihad business. There, Serena leaves a message for him and Xavier about her intentions to sabotage the peace talks as one last effort to keep the war going. Serena goes to Corrin and changes the terms of the deal with Omnius himself, saying that she'll only accept it if the robots free all of the humans. Much to her surprise, Erasmus shows up as well. She thought that he'd been destroyed on Earth. Gilibertus is here to witness this as well. Serena and her Seraphs are taken prisoner, and just as the machines are about to kill her, they realize that this is just what she wants, to be made a martyr and reignite the Jihad. One of the Seraphs then announces that she has orders from the Grand Patriarch. Iblis had implemented a failsafe, and Serena is killed by her own Seraph. On their way back to Kolhar, Beowulf and a group of Neo-Cymex stage an attack on Venport and Zufa's ship. They'd been fed intel in order to be able to stage an ambush to steal the space-folding tech. Just as Venport starts to enter the self-destruct sequence, an asteroid comes out of nowhere, scattering the enemy ships and saving Venport and Zufa. But the asteroid engulfs them next, and the entire cockpit ends up in darkness. It's Hecate. Upon hearing this, Zufa uses her energy power to destroy them all, including herself and Venport, and the asteroid plunges towards Ginaz, causing a tidal wave on the island, much damage, and killing Jul Norat. Norma takes a melange and she has a vision of Serena, Venport, and Zufa's deaths. She also has visions of Arrakis. After Serena hasn't returned long past the date that she was supposed to, Iblis looks into it and finds out that Serena is dead. With some manipulations by him, we'll find out soon enough, words of Serena's death gets out to the League worlds. Vor does suspect that Iblis devised a plan somehow to get rid of her because his popularity was dwindling and now all of a sudden he's beloved again as he calls for renewed efforts to fight. On a trip to the city of Bandalong where the Tluluxa farms are, Xavier, who is accompanying Iblis, is a little bit suspicious and uneasy around them even though he can't really figure out why. One evening, he hears a tap on his window. When he opened the balcony door and a cold, sour breeze slapped his face, he saw his mysterious visitor, a skeletal man with cadaverous grey skin, except where livid scars embroidered it. The man had only one eye. The other hollow socket was a ghastly crater. Translucent tubes ran from his neck into packets of gelatinous fluids strapped to his waist. When Xavier asks who he is and if anybody knows that he's here, the stranger shook his head and the effort seemed to cost him a great deal. His chin sagged onto his own sunken chest. He looked like a great mass of wounds, a shambling collection of scars. Not battle scars, surgical scars. He reveals that he was one of the fighters on IV Ambush, and after he'd returned to his own planet, he was attacked not by the thinking machines, which is what everybody was meant to believe. He was attacked by Iblis and the Tluluxa, who had arrived at his planet, sprayed a paralytic gas in the air, killed many and took many others, and made it look like a machine attack. We learn that the organ farms do generate their own organs, but they're not productive enough to meet the demand for organs, so the farm needs donors. The organ tanks only provide a small fraction of what the Tluluxa supply as organs. The Tluluxa also take some of their organs from slaves, as we already learned, but now we also know that they take organs from people they deem no longer productive, like wounded warriors from battle. Xavier is shocked to learn that Iblis not only knew about this, he was the one who created the system of harvesting organs from people. Crare, this is the donor's name, then takes him to see the confinement beds. Thousands of human bodies lay trapped there, living specimens. Some were nothing but butchered torsos or severed limbs, kept fresh through injections of nutrients and bubbling liquids. Mere scraps of desiccated humanity. Other bodies were fresh acquisitions, strapped down and held captive while their pieces were removed one by one to fill orders. Iblis and the Tluluxa didn't only hit one planet, there were others, and Crare tells Xavier that they plan to attack Caladan next. After Crare finally succumbs to his injuries and his poor state, Iblis catches Xavier there and comes clean about the operation because he thinks that Xavier is on his side. Xavier, to his credit, manages to hide his revulsion. When he asks if Serena knew about this, Iblis says no, but he does explain the cover-up around Serena's death. No, but Tluluxa technology enabled us to complete the illusion of her martyrdom. We used the sample cells that Tluluxa took from her when she visited Selim 10 years ago to grow a genetically identical clone body, which we then mutilated horribly. We captured every moment and highly detailed images, staged every motion, and made Omnius out to be the monster that we all know he is. After this, Xavier tenders his resignation from the army and Iblis accepts. Xavier keeps up the act, the pretense, so that Iblis doesn't see him as a threat. He does give this info to a junior lieutenant, Pablo, who uses a folding ship to escape with this information, while Xavier, deciding that Iblis is the greatest threat to mankind, flies their ship straight into the sun of the planet Selim. At this time, Norma and Venport's son Adrian is 8 years old. So the messenger gets to Caladan and he gives Xavier's last message to Vor, who decides then to take Leronica and their sons with him back to the League of Nobles as a family, where they will now live. This is something that Leronica had wanted for her sons anyway, because on Caladan their future would have been as fishermen and she wanted more for them. And on Arrakis, Ishmael and Marha finally wed, and he becomes Selim's successor. And that is the end of the Machine Crusade. Thank you for watching.